Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sydney Kim and I'm the president of the American Wood Cliosophic Society. Tonight we're thrilled to co-host what's going to be a fantastic debate with the Center for Jewish Life. So I want to just before we begin, give some special thanks to Shira from the CJL for helping us really put this together, as well as members of our governing council, including Ryan Dukeman, our director of program. So as the hub of political activity on campus, Wood Clio has hosted and continues to host many political debates. We host panels, speaker events, we bring in panelists, and we host a lot of the controversial events. So in the past, we've hosted talks about military involvement in the Middle East, and we brought in panelists to discuss the Iranian nuclear struggle. But tonight's event is going to be the most controversial by far. Aaron David Miller, who was the former Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiator under 3 U.S. presidents and 6 secretaries of state, said on this important topic, "I would argue that the real significance of the LatkeHamentaschen debate is that it cannot be resolved." So tonight, to prove him wrong and settle this debate once and for all, we're going to have a fierce debate that will be moderated by President Shirley Tilghman. Arguing for the Hamantaschen side, we have Professor Michael Gordin and Lauren Frost. Arguing for the Latke side, we have Professor Jill Dolan and Eliot Linton. So at the end of all of this, we're going to have a slide up here where you can vote on if you believe that the Latke wins or if the Hamantaschen wins. And there's going to be a slide with all this information, and it will be voting by phone. So with that, may the best dessert win. And I'd like to hand it over to Shira Cohen from the CJL. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shira Cohen, and I'm the president of the Center for Jewish Life Student Board. Welcome to the annual LatkeHamentaschen debate. Backed by popular demand, we have former president of the university, Shirley Tilghman. Professor Tilghman moderated the debate 2 years ago, and last year she graciously allowed President Eisgruber to have a turn as her president's office warming gift. I have it on good but secret authority that Professor Tilghman has been conducting some further genetics research on her own and has created several new strains of the Hanukkah Latke and the Purim Hamantaschen. For comparison, I'll first show the Hanukkah Latke, known to most by its scientific name, H. Latke. Next, the Purim Hamantaschen, shown here in the apricot version. We're not sure yet if these new strains are kosher, but I'd like to preview some of Professor Tilghman's work. She's too modest to share it herself at this stage. It's in the process of peer review, and along with her genetically engineered, never-ripping blintzes, should be public by Shavuot and reunions in late May. First, the genetically modified Hamantaschen. Enough said. Next, several variations of the Latke, constructed in Professor Tilghman's lab, the falafel Latke. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about this one. The heart strain of H. Latke. And finally, a variation on the green glowing gene experiment from Mole 214. Professor Tilghman has introduced the red glowing gene to these Latkes. As you've just seen, Professor Tilghman has more than enough expertise on the topic of Latkes and Hamantaschen. Unfortunately, her weather machine self-destructed upon the end of her presidency, but we're surely glad that Professor Tilghman is moderating again this year. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, former President Shirley Tilghman.
Well, it's so nice to see so many Canadians in the audience. The only people who would ever come out on a night like this, so it's thrilling that we're all together again. So it's a great honor, and to be honest with you, somewhat of a surprise to have been asked to moderate the 2015 LatkeHamentaschen debate, especially after I confessed when moderating the debate in 2013 that I had not the slightest idea what either one of those things are. Now, that deficit in my gastronomic repertoire was happily remedied at the reception after the debate, which reinforced my view of what we WASPs refer to as ethnic food. However, in my role as moderator of the debate, I'm obliged to take no position on the merits of these two delectable items, despite the fact that I am of Irish descent and thus genetically predisposed to favor anything made with potatoes. some Latke fans in the audience. Now, as all of you know, the first LatkeHamentaschen debate was held at the University of Chicago in 1946, which I find curious, to say the least, as the words humorous and fun do not immediately spring to my lips when I think of that august institution of higher learning. But here we are, almost 70 years later, and this academic debate has taken its place among the great debates in American history. I'm thinking, of course, of the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, in which two Illinois state senators debated the expansion of slavery into the territories. The debate over the teaching of evolution by Williams Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow during the Scopes trial of 1925. And of course, the John Kennedy, Richard Nixon debate, in which perspiration and a 5 o'clock shadow determined not only the outcome of the debate, but the election of 1960. You're all too young. See, the elders laugh. Yet it must be said that to my knowledge, none of these historic debates concluded with the enthusiastic consumption of the subject under consideration. Thus, I believe we stand in rarefied air indeed. It is now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished debaters. Arguing on behalf of the noble Hamantaschen is Michael D. Gordin, the Rosengarten Professor of Modern and Contemporary History. Professor Gordin's field of expertise is the history of modern science, and he is the author of a number of prize-winning volumes, including one entitled How Reason Almost Lost Its Mind. That's true. Which I sincerely hope is not a foretaste of his performance this evening. Otherwise, I despair for the Hamantaschen. He's described by one colleague as omnivorous, a quality of dubious value in this debate, given that the term refers to someone who consumes both plants and animals. Ably assisting Professor Gordin in the defense of the Hamantaschen is Lauren Frost, a member of the class of 2016 who hails from Oak Park, Illinois. Comedy is her forte, which is a good thing for the rest of us, given what I know about Professor Gordin's funny bone. She is artistic director of Quipfire, one of the head writers of the Triangle Club, and a head writer for All Nighter, the late night talk show. She reports that she eats more mashed potatoes than anyone she knows, which makes me think that she may not be on the right side of this debate. Professor Jill Dolan leads the team singing the praises of the Latke. Actually, this is not completely accurate. Professor Dolan is not one person, but a number of clones. This is the only possible explanation for the number of roles she plays at Princeton. She is the Anand Professor of English, a professor of theater in the Lewis Center, and the director of the program in Gender and Sexuality Studies. Her research interests include theater and drama, performance studies, women and feminist studies, LGBTQ studies, and American studies. And I understand she will be teaching a graduate seminar in physics next semester. And batting cleanup is Eliot Linton, a member of the class of 2015 from Nashville, Tennessee. Now, he claims that he made the decision to come to Princeton after I promised him that he could sleep on my couch. But I have no memory of this at all. He, too, is a veteran of the Triangle Club and is still the host of All Nighter, which explains why I have not been asked to be a guest again this semester. For his senior thesis in EEB, he lived in a little room in a jungle, grew a beard, and recorded birds as they pecked at clay caterpillars. And critics dare to suggest that a liberal arts education has no value in the workplace. And now if I could ask Professor Dolan and Professor Gordin to come in for the honorary coin toss to decide who begins, we will, after that, let the games begin. Who's calling?
I'm calling. She's calling. Heads.
Heads it is. All right.
All right.
The latke.
Thank you so much for those lovely introductions. I'm really very pleased to be part of this august event this evening. I have to say, as a lifelong Jew, I've had quite a bit of first-hand personal experience with the delectable Hanukkah treat the latke represents in all its metaphorical beauty. But to be invited to talk about the latke's sparkling, even scintillating qualities, this is an opportunity unsurpassed in the history of my work. I launch my argument on behalf of the sizzling latke as a feminist theater critic and performance studies scholar who considers performance among all its cultural implications and who tries to evoke for readers the often ineffable effects of liveness through the medium of the word. So, without PowerPoint or videos, my challenge is to persuade you of the power and the splendor and the wonder of the latke. First, the plot summary. The latke, as you know, is the symbolic treat we eat on Hanukkah, the so-called Festival of Lights, that commemorates the day back in 164 BCE when Judah Maccabee, or Maccabi, depending on your inclination, captured the temple in Jerusalem from the Syrians, when a small earthenware container of oil fueled the lamp for a remarkable 8 days. The holiday was born. Every year we light the venerable 8-pronged menorah and commemorate Hanukkah by eating latkes. In other words, in honor of our forebears, we harden our arteries and aggravate our Crohn's and colitis diseases to recall a mythic moment in a distant past. But what Jewish holiday would be complete without a food to memorialize it? Without the charoset of Passover to symbolize the bricks and mortar of the pyramids, or the apples and honey of the new year, or the utter abjection of Yom Kippur's lack of food, or Purim's triangular-shaped pastry, which I am not going to talk about tonight. Because of all these edible symbols, it's the latke I'm urging you to honor today. Latkes are an ethnic dish, as metaphorically redolent with associations and meaning as Norman Rockwell's paintings of flaky apple pie, cooling on the American windowsill, while blonde, tow-headed Gentile boys and girls crowd around with their noses twitching. Latkes are to Judaism what apple pie is to America, a performative utterance, a foundational identity, a doing as laminated to our souls as those apple pies are to Americana. For Jews, our ethnic tastes are more friable. Imagine the crumbly circumference of the latke with its outstretched tendrils of potato creeping across the twirling oil in gestures that represent our eternal search for home and community. The latke represents our vagrant, mobile, wandering roots and habits of mind. The American apple pie might resemble the staid and pasty Hamantaschen in that pastry's bid for assimilation into whiteness. But the latke, what better way to embody and nourish Jewish exceptionalism than with a dish that's both individualistic in its never quite round, always uniquely shaped, potatoey, oniony orbs, and also communitarian, nestled against its brothers and sisters and trans latke friends in the heat of the frying pan. After all, you can't cook a latke by itself. What self-respecting potato pancake would jump into the frying pan out of the fire by itself? What self-respecting Jew would do the same? Would Arthur Miller's Willie Loman fry alone? No! He needed his family to take the heat with him as they watched together the American dream recede in front of them like a stolen Rockwell pie. Would the dysfunctional Jewish family, epitomized in Josh Harmon's play Bad Jews, be able to define themselves without the bad faith and bad blood they enact among their relatives? No! To be a Jew requires the contradictory carping and clinging of the individual against and with his or her community that the humble latke, crackling in the oil in which it's forged, symbolizes for us all. Think of the latke's genesis as a recipe for Jewish character. Singular potatoes, rough and alone in their thick skins, stand separately and stalwart in a bin until they're taken up by the professional hands of the Jewish cook. The cook spends hours peeling away those self-protective coverings to reveal the vulnerable white, wet meat, grating it into communal mush, squeezing out the liquid, mixing it with the chopped white onions, the bit of garlic, some good kosher salt and pepper, maybe a little flour, patting it, shaping it, refashioning those singular raw ingredients into discs ready for that coruscating heat. Think of the Latkes meeting their hot and oily destiny with a snap and a crackle and a pop, never going gently into that dark pan of the soul, but exclaiming, shrieing even, waving their little shredded hands around in the universally recognized gesture of Jewish ethnicity. Think of the Latkes lying on their backs in the glorious heat, like New York Jews who moved to Florida, flipping over so that their other sides can turn that golden brown and achieve that scrumptious crispness for which every Jewish cook strives. Think of the Latkes resting on their clean paper towel, shaking off the excess oil like a Jewish prince or princess preparing to luxuriate by the sea. Think of the Latkes transferred to a platter where friends and family interrupt their overlapping, argumentative conversations, giddy with excitement to taste the fruits of the Jewish cook's labor. Think of the Latkes slathered in sour cream or graced with a dollop of applesauce, so beautifully dressed for consumption, so difficult to choose among, so proud in the heady equivalent of an Easter bonnet or a mummer's hat. And think of the diners eagerly moving the Latke from platter to plate to palate, swooning with the ultimate taste of edible ethnicity. This, my friends, is the essence of the performance of Jewishness. With its vivacious goodwill and its pungent promises of lusciousness, the Latke performs an eminently Jewish dance, not of death, but of fragrant, poignant life as it crisps and curls and compels, as its constant cooking motion recalls wanderings in wilderness and arrivals in homes across the diaspora, reminding us again and again that Jewishness is an ongoing performance project of race and ethnicity and nation. My friends, what can I say? Sei gesund. Next year in Jerusalem, Shalom Chaverim, let's all win the Maccabi games and vote for the long-lived Latke. Thank you very much.
For my sins, I have to follow that. Which, aha. Aha. Here we are. Well, thank you all for coming out here. Good evening. I'm grateful to have an opportunity to speak to you about crucial matters from my own domain of the history of science. The Hamantaschen, as you know, is an amazing, tasty treat. These here are gluten-free, indicating that everybody can possibly enjoy these. And this is my title this evening, The Astounding Typicality of Hamantaschen. But it might be more accurate to call it this. The LatkeHamentaschen debate, as you know, has a storied past way back into the mists of history, long before University of Chicago in 1946, but I'm not going to take you that far back. Rather, my aim today is to uncover for you the crucial role that Hamantaschen played in inspiring one of the great discoveries, one of the great scientific achievements of 19th century chemistry, perhaps one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. And that, how all of that was ruined almost by the Latke. Okay, so to begin, let's focus on this guy. This is Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev, born in 1834, died in 1907. He's one of the most distinguished scientists of Russian history. And he's most well known, of course, for his formulation in 1869 of the periodic system of chemical elements, the most recognized scientific icon perhaps ever. There is much to say about Mendeleev, but what is little known, and in fact never revealed in public before tonight, based on very recent research that happened last Wednesday, is in fact the way the LatkeHamentaschen debate structured almost every aspect of this discovery. The story begins here in Odessa in the 1850s. Now, when I say Odessa, you might think, oh my God, Ukraine, Crimea. It's not that. Rather, you might be saying to yourself, as you probably all are, the grand metropolis of Judaism in the Russian Empire. And you'd be right. What you probably don't know is that a young Mendeleev was a science teacher in Odessa from 1855 to 1856, and he hated it. Sure, you might think it's the isolation, the fact that he was so far from the metropoles, but really it was because while he was there, he couldn't stand the Latke partisans and their terrible arguments, and how the Hamantaschen partisans were sidelined and marginalized despite the tastiness of their dessert. And this impression lasted for him for a decade and a half, and he carried it through to the discovery of the periodic system of chemical elements. So it is understandable how we should now interpret this document. This is the first periodic system of chemical elements from February 1869. Now, let's look at it for a second. You're probably thinking this is about elements and chemistry, and you're all already bored, and those three people over there are asleep. But nonetheless, you'd be partly right. It's kind of about elements. But these symbols are also about more. There's a hidden narrative embedded in this that Mendeleev wanted you to know about the nature of the Latkes and the Hamantaschens, and the truth in particular about Hamantaschen, and how that truth inspired the system in the first place. The first thing that leaps out to you, surely, is this. You know, H is special. H is number 1. It's also set off to the side, so you pay attention to it. And what is H? I'm not going to say. Well, anyway, there's something else going on here. Buried toward the bottom of the third column in the middle, above a question mark and a non-existent element, is something. It's our villain. It's true. And Mendeleev is so worried about this awful element that he even gets its atomic weight wrong, perhaps hinting at a deeper truth. You might think that's a confusion between atomic number and atomic weight, and that would be petty of you. There's a lot of evidence of this, not just from me, but from Mendeleev's own writings. So let's see what goes on in 1871 when he works out the kinks of this particular table. Here's the table. It's 1871, and you can see that the Hamantaschen is still regnant. But he has also marked it out among the typical elements. That's right there. And they're typical because they're unique. They're the magic key to the properties. The typical elements sit on top of each column of the table and define the essence of chemistry beneath all of them. And what's about the Hamantaschen? What is so important about that? Mendeleev, channeling his frustration from 1856 in Odessa, minces no words. Speaking generally, elements with small atomic weight merit the greatest scientific interest, compared with elements whose weight is large. They are thus typical elements. Hamantaschen, as the lightest element, is justly picked out as the most typical. He can't even be bothered to include Latkes on this particular table. And that's no accident, because Latkes continued to bedevil Mendeleev for years. He famously called them the stumbling block of the periodic system, as these Latke-eyed elements you can see down here just become incredibly difficult to stick inside. He was worried that these elements would founder the whole system. They were indigestible within the entire framework, much as Latkes are indigestible on tables around the world. And of course, I'm not the only one who has noticed this important hidden feature of the history of the periodic system. This is not scientifically accurate, but the periodic table of desserts gives the Hamantaschen pride of place. So I think you know what Mendeleev would say about your important decision today. It's obvious. Thank you very much for your time. I will leave that.
All right. Thank you both. So I'll just get started in a shockingly similar metaphor, but I use the phylogenetic tree of life rather than the periodic table of elements. So let's just get into it. We've all heard the old Jewish adage, if you give a mouse a latke, he'll want to learn Jewish law. And that's a real success story. And of course, we've all heard the inverse. If you give a mouse a Hamantaschen, and say it with me, he'll die horribly after a single bite. And this should disturb you, but it should also beguile you, because its causes are completely mysterious. And I don't stand here attempting to be able to explain this mystery, but rather to point to the fact that there are a lot of issues involving Latke and Hamantaschen that can be looked at through the lens of biology. So here, I'll look at you've all seen this as well, it's the phylogenetic tree of Jewish foods. The first branch off were the simple foods, the kind of pure, single ingredient, single message kind of foods. You've got your challah, your figs, latkes, hummus. Latkes right there, they're simple, they're fundamental. They've been unchanged through a great deal of Jewish evolutionary time. And following their rapid evolution after Hanukkah, they co-evolved, as we all know, with sour cream and applesauce, showing that latkes don't need to be made with something in order to combine with them. They can coexist and form a more delicious whole even after their creation. And then the first major splitting event, of course, is the more complex foods. So we've got things like what do we have? Matzah ball soup. Matzah is simple, but once it gets soup, it's complicated, I promise. Simmes, adafina, kugel, all that, a lot of, nice and complex foods. And so this is, and then of course the final splitting off was the most diverse clade, the bagels, including the mysterious 2 subspecies of lox that we don't know how they're different, but the genetics tell us somehow that they are. And this recent phylogeny comes from my 2006 paper, which I'm sure many of you have read. And judging just from this evidence, it's very hard to know which to prefer. I mean, latkes and Hamantaschen both are in respectable places on the tree, and they seem like they should have a pretty decent claim to being, the most superior Jewish holiday food. But I've just done research and am coming out with a paper that will completely shift this paradigm. So here's the paper. It's a revised phylogeny. You'll see the co-authors are none other than Edward O. Wilson, Shirley M. Tilghman herself, thanks to a lot of the genetic work that was alluded to earlier, and Charles Lamed Darwin. Some of you may not have known his middle name is Lamed. And it was simultaneously published in Science, Nature, and the Talmud, which I know what you're thinking, that doesn't often happen, but this, ladies and gentlemen, is huge. So ignore that slide. This is here's the old tree, which you know, which I've shown you, but what we see is a reclassification of Hamantaschen. Does not belong in the complex foods, but rather down in the gross foods, along with the part of the tree that we don't like to talk about, the gefilte fish and the chopped liver, the pikta, which if you don't know is like a jellified cow's foot. It's an Ashkenazi dish, and that's the most evolutionary evolved thing that this lineage has to offer. And so you'll notice also that the only other change picked up in this phylogeny is that salt bagels are now more closely related to brisket than to the true bagels, which I can't explain at this time, but it's just one of the reasons that working in phylogeny of Jewish foods is such an exciting field. So I think one thing this tree does is help explain why Hamantaschen never lives up to your expectations. It may appear to be a delicious cookie, but every time you put it in your mouth, it always disappoints. And when you look at the fossil record, you'll see that, the fossil record of Jewish foods, you'll see a grosser story still. All the foods which have ever split off from Hamantaschen have since gone extinct, but are notably very disgusting. So you've got raw beefentaschen, really a bad idea. Livertaschen, similar. And then the most horrible of all is babytaschen, which I don't know how that came about, but it horrifies me to this day. And of course, if you look at the things like Dr. Tillman's lab populations, the most common attributes that lab Hamantaschen evolve are pretty chilling too. I mean, flavors like anchovies, horseradish, teeth. And then down at the body end, the most horrible of all, sentience, which is nothing I want to see in a dessert. So here we are, back at the table. Oh, sorry. Latkes, on the other hand, have, if you look at the fossil record, they don't even have a fossil record because everything that's ever come out of the Latke has gone on to thrive. You've got crossover hits like hash browns, like tater tots and French fries, which of course, because of their Hebraic origin, I prefer to call Torah fries. So in summation, I think we are left with very clear evidence that latke is the superior Jewish food. It comes from a proud tradition, a proud branch of the tree, one that our grandparents don't force us to eat, but rather which we eat of our own volition. And I think the Hamantaschen should be best described as a dangerous and disgusting mutant. I'm grossed out by its origins. I'm terrified of what it may evolve into. And I hope you all will join me tonight in voting for its extinction. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm an art history major, and that has affected my presentation today in two ways. First of all, because I'm an artistic soul, I did this entire PowerPoint in Microsoft Paint. And the second reason is that I'm going to do a visual analysis of the Hamantaschen versus the Latke to prove that Hamantaschen is superior. And I know that sounds scary, but I'm a brave person. When I was 8 years old, I figure skated an entire routine dressed as an eel. So I'm not afraid to get this started. So if you look at the Hamantaschen, you've got a food that's made from a circular piece of dough and then folded into a triangle. It's very symmetrical and naturally pleasing to the eye. You might be tempted to draw a comparison between that and Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Please notice the similarities. On the other hand, if you look at something like this image of a large latke in a chair, you may be tempted to draw a comparison between that and the 1964 Joseph Beuys sculpture, Fat Chair, which, as the title suggests, is a large piece of fat in a chair. And I don't want to bore you today by talking so much about all the different ways that Hamantaschen has really influenced art history. Instead, what I want to do is direct your attention to the idea of the artist. So even if you think that the Latke is still a work of art, you may be tempted to change your mind if you hear about the artist. So often we find ourselves looking at a piece of art, admiring it, until we realize that the artist is someone that we do not respect. And I think today you will find that that is the case, because even if you are in support of the Latke, I do not recommend that you support the person who is responsible for it today. That is my opponent, Eliot Linton. Now, I'm in a printmaking class, and for this class, I'm required to make sketches of things that I see during the day. And I decided to use that exercise for this debate. So yesterday, I followed Eliot throughout everything that he did and took sketches of it. And the evidence is damning. We will go through it right now. And I know this sounds like a scary thing for me to do, but like I said, I'm a brave person. Not only did I do this figure skating routine when I was 8, but last week I tried on the costume to see if it still fit me. So I'm not afraid to go through this timeline and show you why you should not trust Eliot Linton. Let's begin. 9:30 a.m., Eliot wakes up. 10 a.m., Eliot eats a breakfast of 1,000 latkes. 10:30 a.m., Eliot kicks a baby. 11 a.m., Eliot travels to the Amazonian rainforest and destroys 12% of it. 12 p.m. Eliot shares lunch with Professor Jill Dolan. They scheme about today's debate. 1:30 p.m. Eliot pays all of his female employees 77 cents for every dollar that he pays his male employees. 3 p.m., Eliot returns to the Amazon and scattered seeds to restore the rainforest. 3:02 p.m., the seeds were magic beans. They form giant vines that stretch up to the heavens. Down from the heavens comes a race of giant people who descend the vines. They trample the 88% of the rainforest that is still remaining. There is no more rainforest. 6 p.m., Eliot eats a dinner of 1,000 latkes. 7:30 p.m., Eliot attends a multimedia theater performance by Professor Jill Dolan, in which she presents pro-Latke propaganda spliced with clips of the polar ice caps melting. 9:30 p.m., Professor Jill Dolan hosts a talkback about the same play. The panelists are her and 4 latkes. No one is allowed to leave the theater. The doors are barricaded. 10 p.m., Eliot visits every roll of toilet paper at Princeton University and rips off 1 ply. Thus, single-handedly creating the impression that Princeton buys 1-ply toilet paper. 11 p.m., Eliot goes to sleep. 11:59 p.m., just as the day is ending, the Hamentaschen gather, the good, sweet Hamantaschen, and decide to restore everything that Eliot has ruined. They give first aid to the baby. They plant new trees in the Amazon. They give the woman 23 cents. They unbarricade the door to the talkback, and they replace all the toilet paper rolls. So as you can see, you should not trust Eliot Linton. This is what he does every day, and the Hamantaschen are forced to restore the world just so we can keep living. And that's a scary job for them, but they are brave, almost as brave as I am. Because not only did I do a figure skating routine dressed as an eel, and not only did I try on that costume last week to see if it still fit, but I wore that costume to this debate. You'll have to bear with me for a second. To stand with me, to be brave, and to vote Hamantaschen.
So are we opening the floor for some questions? I know that there's a lot on your mind right now besides going downstairs and having latkes and Hamantaschen. So, yes, sir, a question from the floor.
Just for the record, guys. Professor Gordin, you might not approve of the, Latke over the Hamantaschen, but you believe in people's right to eat the Hamantaschen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in 2008, according to OpenSecrets.org, you donated $250 to the campaign of Barack Obama. And I want you, having said what you just said, to renounce Obama here today because his goal in vetoing the Keystone Pipeline was to prevent oil from getting So I'm all for choosing the Hamantaschen over the Latke. But will you denounce Barack Obama?
It's a very interesting point. My view is more that there should be sustainable Latke production in the places where it should be, and we should not invest valuable resources crossing international borders into the dangerous zone known as Canada, and thereby polluting the environment and preventing people from enjoying wonderful, circular, then folded into triangle, tasty treats.
Excellent. Other questions? Can this be? Yes, sir.
This question's for Eliot. The journal you published, your article, in the scholarly community that I'm a part of, that's not a reputable journal. Do you have anything to say about that?
Are you referring to the Journal of Hebraic Food Philosophy, or the Talmud, or
They didn't get to publish there.
You're right, but it has been accepted. You're asking me to defend it because you've never heard of it. I don't cite. I would say it has a modest but very important impact, and it's not very well known outside of people who do religious cuisine phylogeny, and so it's not surprising that you don't run in the same circles that would support it. But I urge you to check it out. Coming up is our what month is it?
It's March now, Eliot.
Coming up is our Passover issue, as you can imagine. So there's going to be a lot of well, not a lot of food to talk about, but matzah, salt, horseradish, being dipped things into. So yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, in the back.
This is a question for the side Hamentaschen. So the Latke is a food that's very in favor of individual rights. The Latke supports my right to eat it as an appetizer, as an entree, as a dessert. And yet the Hamentaschen seems so tyrannical in its desire to only be eaten as a dessert. How do you respond to this?
Yes, sure. So I think the Hamantaschen can be finicky if it wants to, much like a great work of art. The environment can destroy it, different types of moisture levels warp it. Art is finicky, the Hamantaschen is finicky. The Latke would be the same if you left it anywhere, so not art. And I think that pretty much speaks to your question.
More questions? If there are no more questions, I think it may be time to get our instructions for voting.
As per this august occasion, so in order to vote, you text this code to that phone number. A response will be sent to you, to which you respond A for the Latke and B for the Hamantaschen. Let's give everyone one last round of applause. Thank you so much. After this, downstairs, both foods will be available. And we'll let the participants go ahead and stand up while everyone's voting, and you can start making your way down the stairs.